Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching this week. And if you did tune in for last week's episode, you've probably noticed that I've trimmed my hair and grown out my beard since then. But if you do want to see more content like that, make sure to like this video because if we get 300 likes, then I'll see about getting some more guest appearances. As always, I do like to start these videos by going over some news and announcements I just found out about, and CMON did just announce that they are going to be launching the DC Heroes United campaign. And this is going to be using the same system as Marvel United, and you can see it looks very similar here, but of course it's going to be taking place in the DC universe, including all of those heroes and villains that you would expect to see there. I'm sure they'll also introduce a few twists as well, and I'm pretty sure this will be compatible with Marvel United, but if you do want to know the differences between the two, I will go into this in a lot more detail during the week of its launch, and of course you can subscribe down below so that you don't miss out on that. Other than that, Glass Cannon Unplugged did just announce their next campaign, which is going to be releasing Don't Starve the board game, which is based on the video game with the same name, and this is a space that Glass Cannon has had quite a lot of experience with when it comes to converting video games into board games, and I think they've done a fantastic job so far with Frostpunk, Apex Legends, and Dying Light, but they've always done justice to the game, incorporating the unique elements of the game into the board game, but then also pairing it with a really solid design. So if you are a fan of Don't Starve, I think it's one to look forward to because they will do a good job here. And one last thing before we jump into the games launching this week, I do just want to give a quick shout out to Alex over at BoardGameCo because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and if you do like this sort of content, you'll definitely want to check him out because he puts out a video at the start of each month going over the campaigns that we expect for that month. Of course, these games and release dates are always shifting around, so you can always jump back here to see what's launching each and every week, but Alex will give you a really good idea of what to expect for that month, and he also covers a lot of other content as well, offering you different reviews and playthroughs and just general commentary on the hobby. So if you are interested in that, definitely go ahead and check him out. And I do also want to mention ZillaBlitz because I focus more on your traditional board games, but for those of you who are also interested in historical war games, this is an area that I don't really jump into too deeply, but Mike over at ZillaBlitz definitely does. He puts out a ton of videos on these types of games, and he also puts out a monthly update as well. So if you want even more games to add to the list, you can go ahead and check him out, and I'll have links to both these channels in the description below. And we don't have too many games launching this week, but we do have quite a few interesting ones, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on April 9th, and this one is called Power Vacuum. And this plays 2 to 4 players, it takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this is coming from Keen Bean Studio, which also created the game Roll Camera, which is a game that I've been wanting to add to my collection for a while now, but it's difficult to find in Canada. But they are branching off into some new territory here because this game is completely different than that one, because this one is a competitive game and this one is also a trick-taking game. And this one takes a fun spin on the genre because not only does it introduce a bunch of unique mechanisms, but also has a really fun theme as well, because in this game players are actually different appliances competing for power. And of course you're going to be gaining that power through winning tricks and backdoor politics, and then spending that power in order to build up different sections of your monument, and the first player to complete their monument is going to be the winner of the game. And the way that all of this works is that the game plays over a series of rounds, and at the start of each round, players are going to be drawing up a hand of cards, and then using those cards to play through a series of tricks. At its core, the trick-taking in this game does work very similar to your traditional trick-taking game, where one player is going to be leading with a suit, and then all players are going to have to match that suit if they're able to do so, but if they're not able to, they can play any card from their hand that they like. And of course there is that one suit that is going to be acting as trump, and in this case it is the red cards. But what makes the implementation of trick-taking in this game a lot different is that all the other players know exactly how many cards you have in each suit, because they can just see it on the back of the cards in your hand. Except there is also one other suit, which is the black colored cards here, and this is known as the spy suit, and this is going to be disguising itself as one of the other colors. And this is nice because it can throw off your opponents, but of course if they do play a particular colored card and then see that in your hand but then you don't play it, they're going to have a pretty good idea that that card is a spy card, but maybe at that point it's already too late. But another great thing about having these spy cards is that they are actually ranked higher than a trump card, so long that another trump card is played, because if you play the spy card and no trump card is played, then the lead suit still does rank higher than it, unless it was played as the lead suit. which is something that you can do to try and fish out the other spy cards in your opponent's hands. So you can already see how these small changes to the system are already adding a bunch of fun new decisions. And the changes don't stop there, because whichever player plays the lowest valued card into a trick is actually going to be able to take an additional action, and this is going to be taken on the power board. And one thing I want to point out about what I just said is that it's the lowest card within that trick, which means that if you played a trump card or a spy card that won the trick, but then also happened to be the lowest value in that trick, you can actually win the trick and then still get this bonus action. And what this action allows you to do is to manipulate the power on the power board. And the way this power board works is that there's going to be a bunch of different characters on this board, and there's always going to be 2 of them that are connected through this fun little power cable. And when you get access to this board, you'll get to decide which of these 2 characters is going to be losing a power token and giving it to the other. And then you also get to move one of the ends of the power cable to one of the other characters out on the board. The reason this is important is because each player is going to be dealt a card at the start of each round, and it's going to dictate which of those characters you want to have with the most power and which of those characters you want to have with the least power at the end of the round. So having more access to the power board means that you get to try and shift things in your favor. A really neat thing about how this works is that there's also a push your luck element here as well, because on your turn you can actually choose to reveal this card at any point within the round, and the earlier you do that within the round, the more points you can potentially get from that card if you're able to achieve either of those 2 objectives or even achieve them both. But if you haven't revealed that card by the time that you have just 4 cards left in your hand, then you can no longer reveal the card for the rest of that round, and instead you can only achieve those points if you're able to fulfill both of those conditions, which turns it into a all or nothing scenario. Players will be getting dealt new cards as well as a new agenda card at the start of each round, but between each round, players will be able to spend any points that they earned in order to build up their monuments, and the game just continues like this until a player is able to fully build out their monument and they win the game. And if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launched on the 9th, we have the Eternaut, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative campaign game that is based on the comic with the same name. The story offered in this campaign does take place in the same universe as the comics, but it is going to be offering its own brand new story that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else. There's also going to be some different decision points and branching paths depending on the successes and failures of the players, as well as any associated consequences. And I really do like what I'm seeing with this one, because it does look very different from other games in this genre. Because first of all, players will have a hand of action cards, but they're not just some set hand of cards. Instead, you're going to be drawing them from a deck each and every round, which means that you're going to have very different actions from round to round, and also you could have multiple of the same action just depending on how you draw. But something else that makes this game very different from basically every other co-op game that I've ever seen is that players aren't actually assigned to any particular character in this game. Instead, when it's your turn, you get to choose an action card from your hand and then decide which character you want to apply that action to. These actions can allow that character to move around on the board, interact with different points of interest, or use various items or abilities, or even jump into battle with different enemies that you might encounter. There is also an action card that allows you to repeat an action that that character has already performed, and there is also an action card that allows you to get rid of fatigue cards. And the way that the fatigue cards work is that at the start of your turn, you can optionally draw 5 cards into your hand and then discard 5 cards, which is essentially giving you more flexibility and options to choose from. But anytime you do that, you do have to assign a fatigue card to one of the characters. And that card's going to limit the amount of actions that that character can take each round. And it's also going to be persisting between rounds unless you're able to get rid of it. But I really do like what I'm seeing with the system here, because I think it does introduce a lot of unique elements into the co-op experience, because in this game, even though you're more focused on managing your own hand of cards rather than focusing on a single particular character, you can only actually play 1 card on your turn, which means that you're gonna have to work with the other players to try and get the most out of all the different characters and try to get each individual character to do what you collectively want that character to do. Not only that, but it also opens up the opportunity for the game to introduce new characters or take characters away as you're playing through even a single scenario, since the amount of characters doesn't actually have to match the amount of players in order for the system to work. And one other thing to note here is that anytime that you play an action card, you're going to be putting it onto that character's board. And anytime that a single character has 4 action cards on their board, that's going to be triggering the end of that round, which is then going to be pulling this time token closer to 0. And if players aren't able to achieve the goals of the scenario before that time token reaches the end, then the players are going to be losing that scenario. But if you haven't completely run out of time yet, anytime that that time token moves, you're also going to be discarding all the cards from each of the character boards, except for those fatigue cards, which, like I said, do persist between rounds unless you're able to get rid of them. And all of these points of interest and items that you're going to be collecting are all going to have different IDs associated with them. What's cool about this is that if you get different items that you think you could mix together, or if you think you can use a particular item in a certain point of interest, you can actually combine those IDs together and then look them up in the campaign booklet to see if there's any resulting effect or event, or if you are able to combine them into a brand new item that you could then go and combine again, potentially with something else. This just opens up so many possibilities and puzzles for players to solve, and I think it's just such a fun and satisfying mechanism when you do figure out which things work well together, and you discover different ways to interact with different points of interest and potentially even get different results. But if you want to learn even more about this one, you can definitely go ahead and check out its campaign, and I will have that linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 9th, we have Solace, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes just 20 to 45 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative campaign game where players are going to be playing through a series of scenarios, making different decisions, and then also taking different paths depending on their successes and failures. But throughout the story, players are going to be traversing different buildings and saving civilians while taking out threats and collecting different types of data. Each scenario is going to have different goals and objectives for the players to try and achieve, but the way that the game works is that each player is going to have their own deck of action cards depending on the character that they're playing as, and then you're going to be using 2 of those cards each round to try and reach your objectives. And I couldn't find a picture of the game actually set up, but essentially the way that this game works is that you're going to have a bunch of different decks of cards, with each of those decks representing a different floor in the building. Players are each going to have their own character card that they'll be able to use actions to move up and down the different floors, essentially giving them access to those different decks. But the different action cards that players gain not only allow them to move between those various decks and go up against those threats, but they can also do other things like allowing them to peek at the top of those decks and even bury cards at the bottom of the deck if they don't want to deal with them, or even reveal cards, which can have different consequences and of course can be a lot less risky if you were able to peek at them first. Of course, if you're not careful, you could end up setting off the alarm within the building, and after players have each performed their 2 actions, you're then going to be activating any of the enemies that are currently revealed and not defeated. And also, if the alarm is going off, you're going to be revealing the top card from each of the individual decks, potentially putting even more enemies out on each floor. Not only that, but you're also going to be flipping over 1 of your cards from your timer deck, which can also cause different effects from round to round. And of course, if that deck completely runs out before you achieve your objectives, then the players do lose that scenario. But if you are interested to learn more about this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description down below. And also launch on April 9th, we have the next campaign from Bunch Shy Games, which is actually going to be introducing 2 brand new games into the collection, but they're both going to be based on an existing game that they already have released, which is known as ROVE. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a solo game that takes about 15 minutes to play. And I'll just give you a quick idea on how the original game plays before I explain these 2 new ones. But this is essentially a game where you have these 6 different cards here, and you're trying to arrange them in different ways in order to complete different mission cards. The catch here is that each of these cards move in a different way, and in order to move these cards, you're going to have to discard a card from your hand, which is going to grant you with a number of movement points. But each one of these cards is also going to have a particular pattern on it, that if you are achieving that pattern at the point when you spend that card, it's actually going to be granting you with some additional movement points. But the thing that makes this game really difficult is that you're only able to replenish your hand of cards anytime that you complete 1 of those mission cards. If you ever run out of cards in your hand, then you lose the game, but there are some special abilities that you can use to your advantage, because each one of these different cards in the grid are going to have a special ability outlined on it, but you can only use each one once per game, and once you've used that ability, you're going to be flipping that card to the other side, indicating that that ability has been spent. And the 2 new editions of this game that are going to be offered in this new campaign are going to be ROVE Jr, which is going to be a simplified version of the game that is ideal to play with kids, and then Aqua ROVE, which is going to be adding a couple changes to the core system, And instead of each of your cards in the grid having a specific way that they move, the cards that you use to move them are going to be dictating those restrictions. But I'll start with explaining how ROVE Jr plays, which is the simplest out of the three, because in this version of the game, you're just going to be manipulating 4 cards into different patterns rather than 6, and also all of these cards move in the exact same way, any amount vertically or horizontally, and they can skip over other cards. And also there's much less restrictions on the patterns that you're trying to achieve, because you can just have any of the cards in any of the positions, whereas with the other versions of the game, they do require you to have certain cards in certain positions within that pattern. But I'll just go ahead and show you exactly how all of this plays out, because I actually have a copy of the game right here in front of me and I have it set up and ready to go. And one thing to note about this game is that you're going to be drawing from a deck for your various movement cards, and each of the cards are going to have different icons or options of cards that card is going to allow you to move if you discard that card from your hand. But on the back of these cards are all the different objectives that you could potentially achieve in the game, making every game play quite a bit differently, because you only have to complete 7 of these to win the game, which means that every time you play this game, you're going to be getting a very different combination. And in this game, you're always going to have one mission card out that you're trying to achieve, so I'll just go ahead and do that right now. So this means that this is the pattern that we're trying to get these 4 cards into in order to complete that mission. The normal difficulty mode in this game allows you to play with 5 cards in your hand, but you can always play with less if you want to make it more difficult. But just for the purpose of showing you how this game plays, I'll just play at normal difficulty. And in order to try and get this shape, I can spend any of these cards. But of course I want to be efficient with this, because I can only draw new cards into my hand by completing a mission. And if I run out of cards before that, then I lose the game. But for my first movement, I'm going to spend this card because it is the most restrictive of all the cards in my hand. And I'll just go ahead and move this pink card down to the bottom here, and you can move cards however you want as long as it's orthogonal and as long as they're still connected to the rest of the cards out on the table. For my next movement, I'll spend this card in order to activate the brain card, which I'll just move down here. And yes, the cards are still considered to be connected if they are connected diagonally, so this is a perfectly valid move. Finally, I'll spend this card in order to move the gear card, and I'll just move it over here, and then that achieves the objective of this card. So this one would be completed. I would then draw a new mission card covering up the previous one, which does have this really fun effect of creating a panorama image here. And then you go ahead and replenish your hand up to 5 cards. And this next one's going to be pretty easy for me, because I can use this card to move the brain one here, and then I can use another brain card to just shift it all the way up here. Completing this pattern earns me my next mission card, and then I would draw back up to my hand limit, and the game continues like this until I complete 7 missions, and then at that point you win the game. As you can see here, the rules are distilled quite a bit to make a very simple and accessible game that is ideal to play with kids, but can still offer quite a bit of challenge if you decide to play on the more difficult settings of playing with just 4 cards in your hand, or even playing down to 3 in the expert level. And if you do want to add a small layer of complexity into this game, each of these cards does also offer a special ability that you can choose to play with, and these work exactly like in the original game, with each of these cards giving you a different one-time use ability that you can choose to use at any point in the game. Playing with these different abilities will make the game a little bit easier, which can be really nice if you're playing on the more difficult modes, but like I said, they do add a small layer of rules overhead, but after a couple games it should be no problem to mix in. Aqua ROVE is going to be more similar to the original version in terms of its difficulty, and it does share a lot more characteristics with that game, although it does have quite a few differences as well. There's a couple minor changes with this version of the game that I do think are fun given its theme, and that's that everything in this game is stacked more vertically rather than horizontally like in the original version of ROVE, and that does include your mission cards, which as you complete them, you're going to be going deeper and deeper into the ocean, which I just think is a fun thematic touch. And I do have this copy here with me as well, so I'll just walk you through a couple rounds here and show you how this one plays and how it differs from the other versions of ROVE. And in this version, we have 6 different modules that you're going to be positioning into different patterns, and each of these modules do also have special abilities that you can use once per game, but you can only activate the ability before or after you actually repositioned that card. Similar to the other versions of ROVE, you're always going to have one mission card out that you're trying to complete. And the one that we just drew here wants us to create a type of J pattern with the light blue sonar looking card in the top center of the J, and then the tail fin purple card located at the bottom. Once again, we'll draw up a hand of 5 movement cards, but these cards are going to be working very different from the other versions of ROVE, because in this version of the game, the cards actually dictate the restrictions or type of movement that you can make. The number in the top left corner is the number of movement points that this card is going to grant you, and then you do get 1 additional movement if the 2 different modules in the bottom left are adjacent in any way, including diagonally. But this pattern in the center dictates the type of movement that you're able to make. And whenever you see these flat lines on the side of the movement, that means whenever you move a card with this, you also have to push any cards beside it that it might run into. And because this one pushes any modules that it moves into, that's great for me, and I can use that to my advantage by moving this blue card to the left, which is also going to push this pink one, which gets these cards a little bit closer into the position that I'm trying to achieve. This next movement card has the pointed arrows, which means that whichever module I decide to move with it, for each movement point, that module can actually move any distance, and it is allowed to pass over other modules. This one gives me 3 movement points, and since the brain and the tail fin are not adjacent to each other, I don't get that extra movement point, and this is going to only get me those 3. But that's fine by me because I'm going to move this one straight up all the way up to here, which is 1 movement point. I'm going to move it over 1, which is the 2nd movement point, and then I'm going to slide it back down, which is that 3rd movement point. This next movement card does allow me to move cards diagonally, but for each movement point that I spend, I can only move that module 1 space. But I am going to use this card, and it does give me 3 movement points, but I only need 1 because I'm just going to be moving this tail fin card into the position it needs to be, just spending 1 movement point and moving it diagonally. This card does not allow me to move through other cards, but since I moved diagonal, that's perfectly fine because I didn't actually pass over the other cards around it. And this is the last type of movement card that you'll see in the deck, which does have the arrows like you've already seen, but rather than just allowing you to move orthogonally, this one allows you to move diagonal as well. And just like the other arrow card, it does allow you to pass over other cards. This one, of course, is very powerful, but it only has 2 movement points, but that's fine for us because we only need to make 1 movement, because we're just going to take this card and move it straight over the tail fin card into the position it needs to be. So now we've completed that J shape with the light blue card in the top center and the tail fin card in the very bottom. This means that we're going to be getting our next mission card and positioning it so it covers the pattern of the previous one, and this is the new objective that we need to try and achieve. But you can already see how this one is much more difficult because I only have 1 card left in my hand. And in this version of the game, whenever you complete a pattern, you only draw 1 more card from the movement card deck. But I also haven't used any of my abilities yet, so I do still have those to take advantage of, and those can be quite powerful if you use them appropriately. But the game continues like this until you've completed 7 different missions, and then at that point, you would win the game. But if you ever run out of all the cards in your hand and you've used up all your abilities, then you lose the game and you're going to have to start over. Hopefully do a little better the next time. But now you know how all the different versions of ROVE play, and the original version of the game will be offered in this campaign as well as a reprint, so if you are interested in that one as well, this is a great chance to get your hand on it. I have played all 3 of these versions multiple times now, and I think my own personal favorite is the Aqua ROVE. I think it's similar enough to the original ROVE that the theme is really the thing that sets it over the edge for me. I really do like the underwater theme and artwork here, and I just think it's kind of fun how they incorporated it with the more vertical feel of the game, with you going deeper and deeper into the ocean as you complete those mission cards. But if I was ranking these strictly on the design, I'd go with the original ROVE, just because I really do like how those individual movement cards each have their own little pattern that you can try to achieve for those additional movement points, which is a little bit more complex than simply having the 2 cards adjacent to each other like the requirements in the Aqua ROVE, but at the same time, it is a lot more interesting to me. Of course, ROVE Jr is almost a different category here, with it being more geared towards kids, but I still think it's a fantastic addition to the series, and I really do think it's a great option for kids, especially since it does offer that more accessible version of the game, but still gives you that flexibility to make the game more difficult, and also include those special abilities as you do get more proficient at it. The campaign's also going to be offering a few expansions for each of these games, and unfortunately I don't have copies of those to show you how each of those play, but if you are interested in this game, you'll definitely want to check those out as well, and I will have links to the campaign in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also on the 9th, we have the tiny epic Game of Thrones. This plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and this one is also my own personal pick of the week. And I want to start by saying that I'm normally not super interested in the Tiny Epic series of games. Normally, I just want the bigger version of the game, but with what they did with Tiny Epic Vikings and then with Tiny Epic Cthulhu, and now with this one, I think they're getting really clever with their designs here, and they've really locked in their system, and it's allowing them to really create these Tiny Epic games and make them feel like a distilled version of those bigger games, which is a really impressive feat because it makes these feel like a more streamlined version of a complete game rather than them feeling like a more watered down version. And I don't have a whole lot of info on how this one plays, but I do have high hopes with the info that I do have, because in this game, players are going to be using a combination of dice drafting and dice worker placement, because what's interesting about this is that there's going to be a pool of dice rolled each and every round, with each side of the die corresponding to a different type of action. Players are going to be taking turns drafting the dice that they want, but then they also get to place that die on one of the unoccupied locations on the action board, essentially allowing them to take 2 actions within a turn, with the difference being that whatever action that you take on the board, all the other players then also get to take that action after you. This is an area control game, so a lot of these actions do have to do with recruiting more units or moving your units by land or by sea. But this is also a Game of Thrones game, which means that there's going to be a lot of politics and manipulating other houses to your side, because in this game, each player is going to be playing as their own house with their own special abilities to take advantage of. But then there's always going to be 3 houses that are not chosen by the players, and instead are going to be acting as neutral houses that players can use actions to win favor with, and then gain access to their special abilities and their strengths to use against their opponents. Players can also gain cards that can grant them with some special or unique actions that aren't found on the action board, but in order to actually play those cards, you do have to perform the action that allows you to do that. And just like in Game of Thrones, all these different houses are going to be at each other's throats and only helping each other out when it benefits them or when it's convenient to do so. And that's where the expansion comes into play, because this is going to be introducing the White Walkers into the game, which is a common threat to all of Westeros, which means that this is going to be turning the game into a cooperative experience. So if you are interested in what this game has to offer, but you're also interested in a cooperative mode, then the expansion is definitely something that you'll want to check out. If you want to learn more about how that's actually implemented, you'll have to check out the campaign, but I will have that linked in the description down below. Also on the 9th, we have a campaign offering you 3 different games, and all these games play quite a bit different from each other, but they all do share a musical theme. And the first one is Bebop, which plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive tile placement game where all the players are going to be competing for the best seats at a music festival. At the start of the game, the main board is going to be set up by randomly assigning different musical instrument tokens to the different stages that are printed out on the board. And then players are going to be taking turns performing one of 2 actions. The first action they can perform is to place one of their seat tokens out on the board. This can be great for securing a position out on the board, and it also does allow you to optionally re-roll one of your dice, because each player is going to have a small pool of dice accessible only to them, and your other option allows you to take one of those dice and then put it into one of your tiles. Anytime that a player puts out a tile, it's always going to be matching their player color, but when it comes to the dice, any player can put out any colored die, and anytime that they do put out a die, they're always going to be gaining a new one, either randomly from the draw bag or by selecting one from the shared pool, which will then be replenished from the draw bag. When you're putting the dice out on the board, there's a couple of objectives that you're trying to achieve. First off, you're going to want to try and place dice in groups of dice that match its color, because anytime you do that, you're going to be gaining a victory point for each same colored die in that group that matches the icon of the die that you just placed there. If any point of that group is also touching one of the many stages, then you also want to have the most dice there matching the icon of one of the instruments on that stage. This is because once a stage is completely surrounded, you're going to be scoring for each of the groups that are touching that stage, with the players that have the most dice in that group matching the icon on the stage being the ones to gain the victory points. A really neat twist in this game is that I've only been telling you the rules for the normal tiles, but each player also has access to a limited number of special tiles. And these tiles can allow you to do different things like place 2 tiles at once, place a tile with a die already in it, or even steal a position of another player's tile. But like I said, you only have a limited number of these special tiles, so you really want to make sure that you're getting the most out of them and using them when it is the most beneficial to you. But the game continues like this, with players placing out their tiles and creating those groups of dice, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And the next game offered in this campaign is called Shuffle and Swing, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 40 to 80 minutes to play. And this one is also a competitive game, but this one is a dice worker placement game. And this one also has a few really interesting mechanisms in it that I haven't really seen in any other games, because the way that this one works is that there's actually 3 different action locations out on the main board, with each of those being associated with a different instrument that the players are collectively trying to contribute effort to in order to build that instrument and score victory points. Each instrument does score a little bit differently than the others, so that might be a factor when players are trying to decide where they want to perform their actions. Each of the 3 different groups of actions do offer the same sets of actions at those locations, but each of them are going to be associated with a different colored icon. And you can see this one down here is orange, this one over here is black, and this one up here is gray. And those indicate which colored cat token you're going to be gaining for performing an action in that location. And this is important because in order to build a location on an instrument, you need to exhaust a number of cat tokens of the appropriate color. And of course, exhausted cats do need to rest, and you won't be able to get them back until you perform the rest action. But what's really neat about this game is that players are going to be taking turns placing their dice in order to perform an action, but whenever you place a die, you're going to be taking the action, but then immediately afterwards, your die is going to be moving clockwise into the next location and also increasing its pip value by 1. What this means is that on a future turn, rather than placing a die, you or one of your opponents can use one of the dice already placed out there in order to perform the action as many times as indicated by the pips on that die. If another player does choose to use your die to perform an action, then you're still going to be gaining the cat token associated with that location rather than them. But the higher value your die is, the more incentive they have to use your die, even if it means that you're gaining a cat from it. And like I said, there's the build action that you'll be able to perform as many times as indicated by the value of the die there. And then there's the rest action, which gets you your cats back, but that does work a little bit differently there because the value of the die indicates the row or column that you'll be able to return back to your supply. And the final action that I haven't explained yet is the inspect action. And whenever you perform this action, you'll be able to move the inspection mouse that many spaces on the associated instrument, triggering scoring on any of the locations that it passes through. This is going to gain victory points to the player that built in those locations. So of course, if you're the one controlling the mouse, then you're going to want to move that mouse through more of your locations and less of your opponents. A really interesting game here, and the game continues like this until the end of the game, where you're going to be adding up all the victory points, but then also adding up the victory points that each player gains from the unique scoring conditions from each of the individual instruments. And then the player with the most victory points after that wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, I will have it linked down below. And the last game we have in the collection is the Cat Blues, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes just 45 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive card game where each player is going to be starting the game with a hand of cards, but then players are going to be taking turns revealing cards from a shared deck until either 2 cards of the same value are revealed or a joker card is revealed. At that point, everyone's going to stop, and then players are going to be taking turns bidding on that pool of cards in order to try and take them into their own hand. The way that bidding works in this game is that players can either bid a set of unique valued cards or a set of cards that have all the same value. Of course, more cards in a set does mean a higher value bid, and in order to stay in the bidding, you always do have to bid higher than the player before you, but cards of the same value do take priority over cards of a unique value. Once all the players pass, then the last player to have bid is going to be the winner of those cards, but of course they're going to have to discard the cards that they bid, but they do get to add those new cards into their hand. The nice thing about being the winner of a bid is that you also get the option to discard quartets of cards in order to gain victory points equal to their value. The rounds continue like this with players using their cards to bid on more cards. And like I said, there are jokers offered in this game as well, and these can be used in any way as any card that you like. But most of the time when you use the jokers, you just get them back into your hand immediately because they are really hard to discard, and the only way to get rid of them is by creating a quartet of the jokers, which doesn't get you any victory points, but they do get rid of the jokers. And the reason that you'll want to do that is because whoever has the most jokers at the end of the game is going to be losing 5 points. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you're interested in this one or any of the others offered in this campaign, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description down below. Launching on April 10th, we have Sunday League Football, which plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive game of football, or for those of us in North America, this is more commonly known as soccer. But this one looks like a really interesting game where players are going to be playing several games over a series of weeks. And every week you're going to have the opportunity to swap out your manager, get new teammates onto your team, and even get some new tactical abilities. Players start the game with their own asymmetrical team, which is provided through a unique deck of cards, with each of the teams having their own strengths and weaknesses. A team's manager is going to be bringing a special ability to the team, but it's also going to be offering special bonuses for certain types of plays. And also the manager does grant you with different types of resources in between games that you can spend to gain defensive or offensive tactics cards, or you could also choose to keep those resources in order to spend them within a game. When you actually play a game, you're not going to be using all the cards in your deck, but you will be able to go through your deck and choose 10 players to use in that game, as well as one goalie. Each player's goalie remains in play over the entirety of one of these soccer games, but each of these games is broken into 3 different rounds, with players randomly drawing 3 cards from their deck of 10 players, but then optionally drawing 1 extra card for any one of those 3 rounds. You are allowed to look at your 3 cards before deciding if that's the round that you want to draw your 4th card. So if there's a particular round that you really want to win, or if you think you are just a little underpowered for a particular round, that might be a good indication that drawing that 4th card in that round might be a good idea. Each player that you draw is going to allow you to gain a certain amount of offensive or defensive resource cubes, and players are going to be using these to issue out on different areas of their board in secret, and then simultaneously revealing them and resolving each one of those locations to see how the game actually plays out. But the first round in the soccer game is all about gaining possession of the ball, and players will only be assigning cubes into the center of their soccer field, and this is essentially betting those cubes, because any amount of cubes that you bet there, you are going to be losing for the rest of the game. But whichever player wins that first round is going to be the player that gains possession of the ball. And possession pretty much determines if you're on the offense or the defense for that round. This board shows what your board might look like when you're on the offense, whereas this board shows what it might look like when you're on the defense, because each player is going to be assigning the appropriate cubes on the right-hand side of their board, but the defensive player can choose whether they want to play cubes to the left-hand side of a box or to the right-hand side of the box. If you play just a single cube on the right-hand side of a box and your opponent tries to take a shot from that box, that's going to block any amount of cubes in that space. And that might sound really enticing for playing cubes to the right-hand side of the box, but the reason that you might want to play them to the left-hand side when you are on the defense is because if you happen to play more cubes onto the left-hand side of a box than your opponent placed in that box, then that's going to allow you to counter your opponent, kick the ball to the other side of the field, and potentially get a goal. So even if you are on the defense, there still is a way for you to score. But if your opponent has more offense there than you have defense, and you didn't place one of your cubes to block a shot, then your opponent is going to be able to take shots for each one of the boxes that condition is true. And every lane in the right-hand side of the board will get resolved if they do have cubes in it, but it's up to the offensive player to decide in what order those lanes get resolved, which does give them quite a bit of control over the game. Anytime that the offensive player does make a shot on the net, you're going to be comparing the number of cubes to the strength of that shot, and the strength of that shot is going to be determined by where the offensive player has placed their cubes on the board. For example, they can place cubes in these spaces behind the net, which doesn't really help them very much on the actual field, but it is a trade-off you'll want to make because putting cubes there does add to the strength of your kick when you do take a shot on goal. Not only that, but the offensive player also gets to draw a card from the shot deck anytime that they take a shot, and that could potentially be adding additional strength to their kick, but it's not always guaranteed. Of course, there's a lot more nuance than I can explain in just a few minutes here in the way that these games actually play out and the different abilities and how they all come into effect, since each of your players can also introduce different abilities into the game. And like I said, in between games, you can change up your manager or even add or remove team members from your team. And all of that's going to be changing the way that you strategize both during and in between each of your soccer matches. But if you are interested in this one, definitely check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. And that's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still do have a giveaway to announce, and this one's going to be for Cosmos Empires. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is an engine building game where players are going to be building up a tableau of cards, and then each of those cards can grant you with some amount of credits that you'll be able to use to buy more cards and put them into your tableau, and that's how you're going to be building up your engine. But on every turn, you're also going to be rolling a die, and each one of your cards is going to have some sort of value associated with it. You're going to have to roll that value in order to activate that card and get its benefits. But on your turn, you do get 2 actions, and you can use your actions in order to modify the value of the die up or down. And almost all your cards are going to be generating you some sort of income, but they can also have special abilities as well. And your cards still do get activated on other players' turns. The new expansion is going to be adding a bunch of new mechanisms into the game, including different abilities that you can take advantage of, the ability to reserve cards for later if you can't quite afford them yet, and also a whole new set of cards that you can just mix into the game. This giveaway is going to be for the complete set pledge, which gets you the core game along with the new expansion. And to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is head over to the giveaways channel over on our Discord, and all you need to do is click the little emoji underneath this giveaway, and that'll get you automatically entered, and this will be drawn at the end of the week. And this one is offered worldwide, so anyone can feel free to enter. Good luck in the giveaway, but now let's go ahead and draw the winner for last week's giveaway, which was for a pledge for Super Trains. And to draw a winner, I use this application here. All these extra names down here are my supporters over on Ko-fi, and if you want to help out this channel and make all these efforts a little bit more sustainable for me, I really do appreciate it, and I do have a link to that down in the description below. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner for Super Trains is Gabrielle, and they say that their son mostly likes to watch streamers on YouTube, but they do manage to play some board games, and Super Train does look cool. Congratulations on the win, and I'm happy to get one more game sent your way, and I agree, Super Trains does look cool, and I hope you enjoy it. Just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com, and we'll get that pledge all sorted out for you. And that's everything I have for you this week, and if you're noticing the glare in the top center of the screen, that's because I am filming this in the following morning, because I was filming till like 3:30 last night, and I just did not have it in me. I don't think I was doing a great job, so I apologize if the difficulty I was having did make its way into the video in one form or another. Hopefully I was somewhat sensible, but I guess I'll find out with my editing shortly here. Still pretty tired, but I do have my coffee, so I'm hoping for my second wind, and then hopefully also playing a bit of 7th Citadel later, because I have really been enjoying that game. I think I'm almost done the first threat, which has been a ton of hours already, but I am not getting sick of it, which I am really happy about. I am wondering how repetitive it'll get in the future threats, since you do still play on the same map as far as I can tell, but I'll just have to keep playing through it and see what I think. But honestly, even this first threat has gotten more hours in on this game than a lot of other games in my collection, so I think it is a win here either way. That's everything I have for you this week, and I should get to that editing so that this video doesn't go up too late. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for the support. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.